Toxic player behavior has always been an issue for any gaming community. Whenever there is a larger group of people, some of them won't get along. It's just human nature. But the game League of Legends is really something special in that regard. Not only has our community been notorious for its extraordinary toxicity since its very inception, but the problem seems to get worse and worse year after year. However, do we just have to accept that as a fact of life? Or are there any countermeasures Riot Games could take to make the League of Legends experience better for all of us? In fact, I firmly believe that Riot Games could actually fix the problem, and here's how. Of course, there are several approaches that have been suggested by many people already, but all of them have their own inherent flaws, which we have to address here. And by that, I either mean that the approach itself doesn't work, or that Riot's implementation is lackluster. The most obvious one, which is also what Riot are trying to do right now with questionable success, is to implement stricter penalties for toxic behavior, such as longer bans for players who are abusing the in-game chat, for example. However, as we all have witnessed by now, this idea is extremely flawed, and in this case especially the way it is put into practice. Naturally, the most important issue at hand is, do more severe punishments actually cause players to be less toxic? Because if there is no correlation in the first place, then we don't even need to ask why Riot's current policy isn't working. The question of how more severe punishments affect player behavior is a complex one, with many factors you need to consider. On the one hand, it could be argued that harsher punishments serve as a deterrent, as the fear of being caught by the system and facing severe consequences may make you think twice before lashing out on your teammates. If your account gets permabanned after telling your teammate to, you know what, it would be logical to avoid that behavior altogether. On the other hand, humans are not entirely logical creatures. In fact, there is actual research that suggests that harsher punishments may lead to an increase in toxicity, as they can create a cycle of resentment that fuels the player's negative behavior even more. One might argue, of course, that this wouldn't matter as much, since a resentful player that flames and feeds until the account is banned cannot play anymore and therefore not flame in the future. The reality, however, is much different, and also humans are not stupid. After getting a 14-day suspension, some players actually just go to a Smurf account, enter a ranked game and run it down to get their revenge. They also don't type a single word, since this way they know the system won't catch them nearly as fast. Which is, by the way, also another Achilles heel. Riot have been getting much more strict, but this also caused a lot of players to get punished for the most innocent behaviors, since the penalty system has such awful accuracy. It doesn't catch people who spam the news ping, but it does punish players who type "sorry, that was stupid of me" in chat, because apparently stupid is a bad no-no word. Consequentially, if Riot wants to go down that path, they would first need to drastically improve their software, which is actually much easier than I thought. Riot are working with language filters after all, and setting them up in a way that catches people who are trying to bypass them is rather straightforward in this day and age. Language filters are algorithms designed to identify and block certain words or phrases in a given text, in this case the chat, and guess what? Your pings are displayed in chat as well. This means the filter can be trained to interpret them in context. There are several ways already in which language filters can be programmed to be more effective at preventing users from bypassing them with alternative spelling. You have to keep in mind, 10 bait pings in a row on top of a teammate that just died are for all intents and purposes an alternative way of spelling KYS. Riot could use machine learning algorithms that can learn to identify words, phrases, and pings based on their context and meaning. Once such a system is set up, it wouldn't matter whether you typed KYS, used the rogue ping, or whatever other lingo might be popular at the time. The filter would pick it up. But even if Riot considered such a deep learning algorithm too expensive to improve the player experience of their core game, there is still another way. You can improve the effectiveness of even cheap language filters using a combination of algorithms and human moderators. Remember the tribunal that Riot set up like 10 years ago? Yeah, exactly that, and it didn't even cost them real money since it was a community effort. And this approach is particularly useful for identifying slang or informal language that may be difficult for a cheaper machine learning algorithm to recognize. You know, such as the question mark or the bait ping. This would be the easiest and cheapest way Riot could actually enforce the Summoner's Code. However, I'm still not the biggest fan of the approach altogether. The evidence whether draconian penalties actually improve player behavior is very conflicting, and even in the education system, which is my field of professional expertise by the way, punishment is commonly considered a terribly ineffective way to improve a student's behavior. But there is an alternative, something much more simple and elegant. Let's talk about positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is a type of reinforcement used in psychology to increase the likelihood that a certain behavior will occur again in the future. This is done by providing a reward or a positive stimulus after a desired behavior is exhibited. In other words, it is the exact opposite of punishment. This type of reinforcement can be used in situations where a player engaged in commendable behavior, and it is an effective way to prevent toxic behavior from occurring in the future. We humans just love praise and recognition, and it is a very strong motivator. At least in theory. Because in order to use positive reinforcement effectively to prevent unwanted behavior, a reward or positive stimulus must be provided when the desired behavior is exhibited. And yes, Riot have, albeit half-heartedly, implemented such a reward via the honor system, but here's why it doesn't work. The key to positive reinforcement is to make sure the reward is something that is meaningful and desirable to the players. And it is also important to be consistent with the use of positive reinforcement. This means that the reward should be provided every time the desired behavior is exhibited, so that the player learns to associate the behavior with the reward. However, as all of you know, Riot's honor system is fulfilling neither of these criteria. Let's first talk about the reward being desirable. Sure, players above a certain honor level get access to the loot system, which allows you to unlock new skins. All of this sounds so far so good, at least in theory. Because in reality, the chance of getting a skin you really care about is extremely small. In the overwhelming majority of cases, you get a skin for a champion you've never played before, and which you do not want to play in the future. If you get a champion skin at all, since often enough you just get a champion shard, or, forbid, a stupid emote or ward skin. This of course makes sense from a business perspective, since Riot wants you to buy the skins you would actually like to have with real money. And the sad reality is that this is more important to them than setting up a positive reinforcement system that can do its job. But this is not even the worst part. The much bigger problem is that, from a player's perspective, Riot's honor system is emotionally far removed from a player's in-game behavior. Climbing the honor ranks feels more like a participation trophy, and even psychologically speaking, the system is not set up like a positive reinforcement strategy at all, but instead like a punishment. Because rather than unlocking it with good behavior, you instead get it taken away from you after bad behavior. The effective result is the same, of course, but this makes a massive difference for the players from a psychological standpoint. Additionally, the reward is given way too late. An advanced language filter giving you a satisfying sound effect, for example, whenever you encourage a teammate in chat, would unironically be much more effective than a random honor capsule popping on your screen when you log into your account the next day. Positive reinforcement is definitely a powerful tool for preventing toxic behavior, but the way Riot set it up in their game is a complete joke. Yet that's not all. There's also a third way how Riot could prevent toxicity in their game, but as of now, they are utterly failing this one as well. But before we explore this topic, keep in mind that if you want to have thought-provoking and educational League of Legends content in your personal feed, all you need to do is click the subscribe button. Okay, so in order to understand this third option Riot has, we have to look at a classic example of in-game toxicity. Let's imagine the following situation. You are your team's jungler, and the top laner is losing. They are constantly pinging you, asking you to help them in their lane, but instead you prioritize bot lane to help them snowball and secure dragons because you think that this is the best play you can make for your team. Your top laner gets frustrated and starts flaming you for your decision, and maybe you get annoyed and flame back. Okay, another example. You are playing supports, and after a bot lane 2v2, you and your AD carry killed the opposing bot lane, but your AD carry died as well. You decide to push the wave into tower before backing off yourself, but your ADC starts flaming you because they think you are taking farm away from them, since the wave would have been a perfect freeze in their opinion. Situations like these are the #1 cause for toxicity, and yes, they are fundamentally Riot's fault. Most people play League of Legends completely by ear, making up strategies as they go. But they don't do this because they would be lazy. Instead, Riot are providing exactly zero educational material on how their game actually works or what optimal solo queue strategies would look like. Their tutorials are utter garbage, so you as a player have to go out of your way to find such materials elsewhere on the internet. Even worse, newer players have absolutely no chance to gauge the quality of the content they consume, so all they can do is trust that whatever a given content creator presents them is actually true. Riot Games could work on providing players with much more resources and support themselves to help them improve their gameplay and reduce frustration levels. Instead, their tutorial is as lazy as it could possibly be. So all the options are there, just waiting to be realized. But the issue is that Riot Games as a business-oriented company has absolutely no monetary incentive to implement these possible solutions. Instead of improving their core game, they rather spend their budget on their skin team, their 2D fighter, their single-player RPG, their music and TV shows, and on literally anything but Summoner's Rift. Therefore, the problem of in-game toxicity and trolling will persist as long as that's the case. And honestly, I have no idea what we could do to change that. Because at the end of the day, this is our problem, the problem of the players who love this game. If you have any suggestions how we could incentivize Riot to use their resources in their actual game, please share them with everyone down below. But if discussions like this one are interesting to you, you might also enjoy my video on League of Legends stat websites. So if you want to know why these are inherently flawed, just click the link on your screen right there.